Hi, my name is Bill Crum with News OK and the Oklahoman. With me today is Jane Abraham, the Community and Government Affairs Manager in the Oklahoma City Manager's Office. We're going to talk today about the legislature, wrap up legislative issues as they pertain to and affected the city of Oklahoma City in the session that ended a couple of weeks ago. Jane, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
Preemption was a word that got quite a bit of attention this year at the legislature. What exactly are we talking about when the legislature passes a bill that preempts local control?
Essentially what is meant by that when it's used is that there are certain powers or responsibilities that are essentially left to cities to manage in Oklahoma. And now and then the legislature passes legislation to essentially usurp that authority or ability that cities had once had.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and the city is a political subdivision of the state, so it is subordinate to the state, and the legislature has the power to do these things. A couple of examples this year: oil and gas exploration within city limits.
Right. So there were several bills filed at the beginning of the session, and we worked with the governor's office, also worked with the municipal league and the energy industry to try to figure out ways to, I guess, change or tweak the language or have the language be such that cities could still have some control over some things that we felt were important to balance the needs of our citizens and the oil and gas industry. I mean, obviously, the oil and gas industry is critically important to the state, but we also want to protect our citizens' rights as well.
And how did that come out? I think we're talking about how far an oil well or a drilling site might be from my backyard.
Correct.
Or maybe some things to do with runoff during rainstorms when from an industrial site or something like that. How did that come out for residents?
Well,
what might we see that's different?
So there are certain areas that cities can regulate as it relates to setbacks, as it relates to screening, noise, I think road issues, dealing with roads and access and that kind of thing. There was also an amendment was placed into the bill that passed, Senate Bill 809, that addressed some of the floodplain issues that were a concern. We're not sure how it's still being analyzed kind of in the context of what was passed, because we wanted to make sure that we maintained floodplain management authority such that we could keep flood insurance regulations in place, which are controlled at the federal level. So I think it came out really fairly balanced in terms of what was passed. We're going to need to look at our ordinances and see what has to change. But I mean, I think honestly what ended up, the final product turned out to really be pretty balanced.
Okay, and of course the main concern in the headline grabber was the legislature wants to prevent cities from banning drilling within the city limits.
Correct.
And fracking, I think, was the buzzword.
Exactly,
yeah.
And that came from the city of Denton in Texas, and Texas passed a similar bill to prevent a preemptive bill over municipalities' authority to regulate oil and gas. And basically that is in response to the city of Denton passed a ban on fracking activities within their city limits. And it shut down a number of wells, and so that raised a significant level of concern among the industry.
Uber and Lyft, the transportation network companies that are very trendy these days and growing like crazy, the legislature assumed regulatory control over that particular model for what we all, I think, commonly think of as taxi cabs.
Right.
And the city of Oklahoma City then is going to have to repeal.
That's correct.
The ordinance that it passed.
So what we had done is we put in place regulations governing TNCs that we felt were really fairly balanced, trying to balance the taxi industry and then also the new TNC companies. So that's been taken over by the Corporation Commission. And I mean, bottom line is we hope that that they'll be able to be successful in terms of regulating that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
The city was interested in public safety.
Correct.
I think in
Correct.
inspections of vehicles, making sure the drivers were not a threat to the public
Right.
when they were on the
Background
street
checks.
and when they were conveying people from place to place,
Correct.
which is in line with the way taxis are regulated.
Right.
So I guess we'll see how it works out within the city
Yes.
limits.
Yep.
Guns
Yeah.
were another topic of debate, especially toward the end of the legislative session. There was a great deal of concern that private events, if I understand it correctly, held in public facilities might be forced to allow people with weapons or with like concealed weapons privileges
Right.
inside. And how did that work out?
So the governor ended up vetoing that bill. The bill was passed and sent to her, and she vetoed it. I think there was some talk of trying to modify that language to address some of the concerns. The primary concern is that there were several exceptions laid out in the law. For example, like in public arenas, professional sporting events, but that doesn't cover non-professional sporting events. And so I think there was just some confusion and really maybe not as much clarity in the law that was passed that probably needs to be addressed.
We just saw a great example of one of those kind of events. The NCAA's Women's College World Series
Right.
for softball was just here. It had great crowds.
Great crowds, great
No
viewers.
no gun incidents,
No gun
that we
incidents.
know of there. So that came off well. A little bit of a segue here from guns to policing.
Okay.
Body cameras.
Body cameras.
The governor signed the bill, I believe this week.
Yesterday, yeah.
Yes,
She
to balance, the way I understand it, the needs of the public to know what law enforcement is doing and the needs of law enforcement to be able to investigate crime.
Exactly.
How did that one work out?
That worked out really well. Essentially, last year, the Open Records Act was modified to address dash cams and to try to address the electronic files that are stored that way. And no one really thought about body cameras and how that was going to be different and maybe more invasive in terms of what is being recorded as police go through people's homes, as they're interviewing victims, things like that. So what this attempts to do is to balance the privacy needs for citizens along with the transparency. And I think that we've really reached that balance with this bill.
And it was sponsored by Senator Holt,
Correct.
who is
Senator
from
Holt.
Oklahoma City.
Right, and Representative Fott
Yeah.
from Muskogee.
And Oklahoma City's Police Chief Bill City, I think, participated
Correct.
in drafting that legislation. I know he's been concerned about it, and Oklahoma City is, I think, on the cusp of beginning to deploy police body cameras in a
As a pilot
what would you call it? A pilot
Yeah,
program,
a
right?
pilot
Exactly.
Yes, and also the district attorneys were involved throughout the state. The District Attorney's Council and District Attorney David Prater was also involved in crafting that language.
Okay, so we'll see over the next
And the
year or
Press
two how that works
Association.
out. And the Press Association too. Lightning round time. Tax increment financing has been a big issue here in Oklahoma City. It is known as TIF. It's a way that cities can promote economic development by making public investments. There were some bills in the legislature. How did that come out as far as Oklahoma City is concerned?
There was one bill that passed addressed TIFs. Senate Bill, I want to say 342 by Senator Standridge sponsored that bill. It ended up making some changes in terms of notification and I think the makeup of the TIF review board, and we're fine with the changes. We don't think it's going to hamper the ability to create TIFs, but maybe provide more balance in the future.
Contractors, a couple of contractors' bills. One was to require public entities like the city, if I understand it correctly, to use local contractors. There were some concerns about definitions there.
Right. So it was a local preference bill, so that in the Competitive Bidding Act, you would be able to accept the lower bidder if they were local within certain thresholds. The bill made it through to the governor's desk. She vetoed it. I think, as I understand in her statement, that she felt like some of the terms were maybe not defined as well as they needed to be. For example, what does local mean? What type of footprint are you looking at, or radius from the place that you're looking at? Also, what was the definition of a economic development impact, or economic impact that would have that would be positive?
So that one maybe needs a little bit more work.
I think so. My guess is it will be back.
Another bill that sounded like it was aimed at allowing me to hire an unlicensed contractor to do work here in the city. And of course, the city inspects work that's done because they want to know that plumbing is done right, for instance, and so on and so forth. That was a concern to the city. It was.
We find about a 20% reinspection on work that's done by non-licensed contractors. So, 1 out of 5. Also, there's public safety concerns with that. If you don't do certain things correctly, it can cause significant problems, not just for you and your home, but also for your neighbors. So that was a concern. The bill was not passed. But my guess is it may go through some changes and be back as well.
And the city generally would say if you're having work done on your house, look for a licensed contractor.
Yes, that's the best way to go.
The American Indian Cultural Center and Museum bill passed. The legislature has passed some provisions with the intent of shifting the responsibility for operations of that to the city of Oklahoma City. How is Oklahoma City responding at this point? I know it's just the beginning of a months-long process.
Yes, the mayor has appointed a committee to look at the issue, and then also I believe the city manager is going to direct staff to do calculations and due diligence to see what it looks like, see what we're looking at in terms of what the city would be taking on.
Any idea when we might know when that review is done and the city will have a decision?
I don't. Okay. I know that there's a deadline in the bill to come up with an agreement by January, so I know that that's a deadline. But as far as how long it will take, I don't.
Okay, that's an okay answer. Shifting gears a little bit, the director and assistant director of the Oklahoma City Municipal Court, we found out this week, have been put on administrative leave. It's a personnel matter. Details have not been revealed, properly so, I suspect. You are going to be the interim director.
I am.
Starting
last Friday.
Starting last Friday.
Yeah.
So what is the top priority there at the municipal court? The municipal court has a budget of about $11.5 million, somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 or 80 employees, and it brings in fines and fees amounting to, in the next fiscal year, an estimated $27.3 million. So it's a significant part of the city budget. What's the top priority for you going in over there?
Well, I'm not there to make changes and do anything like that. I'm honored to have been asked to take on this role by the city manager on an interim basis. It's a really well-run operation in terms of the way the finances are handled. The division heads are very good at their jobs, and it's a very critical function for the city.
Okay, so top priority is to keep things going the way they're going.
Exactly.
Okay.
Keep things going. That's the plan.
Well, thanks very much. I'm Bill Crum, again for News OK, and for the Oklahoman, we've been talking with Jane Abraham, who is the Community and Government Affairs Manager in City Manager Jim Couch's office. She is also the new interim director of the Oklahoma City Municipal Court. Thanks, Jane.